If following Jesus and being a disciple is what Genesis 22 is asking everyone to do, I bet some of us will pack our bags and leave. Your son or God? Your daughter or God? In fact, we might pretend that we aren't hearing God's call of us. Genesis 22 opens with God calling Abraham. Abraham. And he has the audacity to say, "Here I am." And what God does next is not what anyone wants to hear. Take your son, your only son, right? Take your child. Whether you have 50, and give it back to me. But in fact, if you think more closely, when God calls your name, the statement is much deeper than what Abraham hears. God says, "John, Mary, Terry, take your life, your only life, and give it to me." That's the relationship God is inviting us to. And in fact, the righteousness of God just simply means the right relationship with God. It's not having a perfect life or perfect being or idea, having this relationship with God. For those of you who read philosophical books and you read Søren Kierkegaard, he deals with this story and he comes to this conclusion: either Abraham is crazy, losing his mind, or he is truly a person of faith. That's what Kierkegaard asks us to consider. Abraham, or some of us, just might be out of our minds, or we really are people of faith, deep faith. So pause there for a moment, and let's look at what Paul is trying to do with us in Romans. Paul is lifting the word sin that we don't see or speak much about in the Episcopal Church, right? We just don't talk about sin because some of us think we're not sinners. And Paul is saying today that, guess what? You are a sinner. Yeah, that's what he says today. I am a sinner. That's what Paul is trying to imply. But he's trying to get to a gradation by saying, you know, all of us are slave to something. Slave may not be a comfortable word for some people. He says all of us are prisoners of something. We can become prisoners of sin. Some of us are prisoners of our possession. Yes, we are possessed by what we have. That's a kind of prison, even if you hold the keys to it. But he focused on this word sin. So let's define sin at least the way I think I understand it, right? To be a sinner doesn't make you an evil person. So when people hear sinners, they think of evil people. Here's what I want you to think about. Remember that every sin is not an evil, but every evil is a sin. You follow me so far? Every evil thing you do, I do, is a sin, but not every sin you commit, I commit, is evil. Sin simply means to miss the mark. If God invites you to pin the doors of this church every Monday, and a Monday comes by and you're not painting the door, guess what you are? You are sinning because you missed the mark. You're not living to God's call of your life. But there's no evil in the act of not doing so. So don't be afraid to identify sin or speak of sin. It's an invitation to look deep within ourselves to see whether or not the yes we have said to God or the here I am we have said to God, we're living into that. Abraham is trying to avoid being a sinner. So he's tried to do what? Sacrifice his son. And he gets there. I mean, he tells a little small lie on the way, doesn't he? The boy says, we're going to the sacrifice? Where's the sacrifice? He said, I see the wood, I see the fire, but where's the lamb, right? That was his understanding of a sacrifice. The child doesn't know that he is the sacrifice. You and I may not know that we are the sacrifice when we say yes to God. And God, in all of our yeses, right, provides Jesus Christ as the Lamb. So you and I don't have to build this wood or this fire as our response to living in God's righteousness. Because now the right relationship has been provided by God through Jesus Christ. Christ is our true sacrifice. And that's what Paul is driving through. Your sin, your debt have been paid. So don't wallow in it, he says. Yes. Don't continue in it, he says. Live as if you have a right relationship with God. Not a perfect relationship. It's not what he's asking of us. A right relationship. The one you desire, the one I desire. The one that makes us whole. That enables us to draw a big circle. Did I say circle? A big circle. And that circle is implied in our gospel. Jesus used the word welcome. If you welcome a prophet, he said, you get a prophet reward. A stranger, you go from prophet to a righteous person. And then he comes to this fine line. If you gave a cup of cold water to somebody who is thirsty, you are in the right relationship with God. You and I get rewarded for what we do. If you want to impress the world, that's the reward you get. But he says, if you tend to the need of the marginalized, the helpless, the hungry, the poor, that's what Jesus is emphasizing as what? The righteousness of God. You want a right relationship with God? Have a right relationship with the poor, the homeless, the thirsty. Mm-hmm. That is the true sacrifice. So when your name is called and you say, here I am, God says, take your life, take what you have, and share it, and make another life better or whole. That's how it's called. Is it hard? It's indeed hard, because too many of us are possessed by our possessions. We are prisoners, we are slaves to what we have. Even churchgoers, yeah. I want to close with a story that you will hear me tell over and over again, because it comes from the best theologian I know. That's my mother. Yes. And the idea of becoming prisoners of things we love to do or slave to it can happen in the church. If we aren't careful, we become prisoners and slaves to the things that we should be doing. So here's what my mother did to me on a Sunday morning in February. And she says, I'm leaving for church. If you are like me, the church bell rings 3 times. An hour before service starts, 30 minutes before service starts, the second bell, and then before service starts, the third bell rings. So By the ring of the first bell, I was on my way to church, and my mother blocks my entrance. She stands in front of the house of the front door, so I can't even leave. And I'm not quite 12. And she says to me, don't get too busy doing church work, this good thing we do in the church, that you forget to do God's work. Now, here's a kid who is not quite 12 years old, and he is to figure out what God's work is and what church work is. So that's what was in my mind and in my imagination as I walked from my house to the church with my vestments on my arm. What is church work? What is God's work? Think about it. It is like sin and evil, right? You remember earlier I said every evil is not a sin, right? Every sin is not evil, but every evil is a sin. So that you can be a sinner and not be an evildoer. But if you're an evildoer, you are indeed a sinner. But what is church work and what is God's work? Every bit of God's work will accomplish church work. Not everything we do in the church can accomplish God's work. Church work is very messy. It hurts people's feelings. We discriminate in church work. We own and take roles in church work. We use church work to put other people down. God's work doesn't do that. God frees us from ourselves so that we can be what? More loving, kind. Yes, that's what God's work is about. Impacting the lives of others so that they see you, they see God. That's what God's work is like. When someone sees you in the street, they should see in you an image of God. That's what God's work looks like. It is about this right relationship, not this perfect relationship. It is about this righteousness that only God can give to us. So the next time you find yourself arguing about church activity, ask yourself this one: where is God in it? The minute God is pushed out of the work of the church, it ceases to be God's work. It might be church work, but it may not be God's work. The church has discouraged so many people from following Jesus because they were doing church work. God's work is healing work. God's work is transformative work. God's work invites us to surrender ourselves so that we might become the righteousness of God. May God be glorified. May Jesus Christ be praised. Amen.